Okay, obviously, I gave this presentation at Stockton University in March for something called the Pineland Short Course, which is a one-day thing. And Joe Walsh, as he was looking at the thing and asking the screen and asking me what it was about, it dawned on me that I never changed the date on that slide. And so, don't think it's March 10th. Here's where this started. It started in a meeting of the Sons of the American Revolution when I gave a presentation on the affair at Chestnut Neck. And I made a statement, and that was that of the 30 pension applications that have survived from people that would now live in what's called Atlantic County, about 6 or 7 of them said that the first thing they did in late 1775 or early 1776 was go down in a boat and go out to the inlet and build a watch fort. At one time, it probably had 2 cannon in it. We actually have the bill for them. And we have a letter saying they were moved. But that's all we know about it. Another person in the Sons of the American Revolution said the inlet couldn't have been there because it's not there now. And he said those people's witness is not, those witnesses are not valid. And so we decided to see if we could prove it. And prove it we did, from letters written to Colonel Richard Summers by Major Payne on the island watching the British trying to get in for the affair at Chestnut Neck. And so my question was, if the inlet was 5 miles north from where it is now, how did it get there? That's not your cell phone, by the way. We can't turn off our phone. And so we can't follow our own request. And so being able to show and prove how inlets move was where this all started. It came solely from my curiosity, and I think it's a fascinating story. So as we go on, I want to thank you for coming. There's an email that'll be on the final screen if you need to reach me for anything. But here's the question I want to begin with, because this was first given at the Pineland Short Course. So what on earth could the Pinelands have to do with changes in our beaches, our breaches, my cute word that starts with a B for inlets, and bays over the last 400 years? And my statement at the bottom is simple. Be patient. Focus on what I say about the inlets. Just think inlet, and you'll see an interesting story unfold. I'll unfold it first at Little Egg Harbor, and then I'll move down to Brigantine, Atlantic City, and Great Egg Harbor and show you that the same thing happened, and that Atlantic County did not always look like Atlantic County looks now. 1833. The best preserved old map is the Gordon map. I want you to notice something with me, and I want you to note, do you see these set of islands here? Do you see the way that they're aimed at the inlet? That is called a flood tide delta. They normally form from storms, and then they get on the bottom of the bay, and then they grow up and get vegetation, and over 50, 75, 100, 150 years, a set of islands forms just like this inside an inlet. You say, Norm, I see another set here. You're right, but you don't see a what? An inlet, but look at the map. Old Brigantine Inlet. Before this existed, this existed. Now, what you don't see on the map, for whatever reason, this particular map artist did not include it, is where I have this green star. There is another set of islands even today. And that came from this inlet, which was the inlet that was here during the American Revolution. So here's my statement to you. If you're looking at a map and you see a set of flood tide delta islands, guess what was there at some time in our history in the last 400 or 500 years? An inlet, that's correct. And that's what we're going to talk about tonight. Now, this is an 1841 map, only 8 years later, done by the U.S. government, and that missing flood tide delta, there it is right there. Here's the inlet. It's reversed this time. Here's the ocean. the inlet, and can you see how it cuts out? And this little inlet right here is called Soldier's Hole because the Revolutionary Fort was right here on this point. And what they could do is they could either come through this creek back here to warn the people in Atlantic County, or come through this creek to warn the people in what today is Burlington County. And they are the three areas that I showed you in the previous map. Now I want to keep on moving so I don't get bogged down. I want you to ask this question in your own mind. Why do inlets move around? The quick answer that people give is, oh, they move, Norm, because of our storms. Well, that's true to a degree, but it's not the whole picture, and not anywhere near the whole picture. They move because of a thing called longshore currents. How many of you have gone to the beach in your lives with yourself, your kids, your grandkids? Now, I want you to picture this. 16, I'm with my friends, I'm in Atlantic City, there's a dozen of us, and we go down to the beach at Providence Avenue, right near the old high school, right near where the new Stockton campus will be, and we're out there, and we're out further than we should be during the day because we went in the evening so the lifeguards couldn't bother us. But what happens is, after we're out there swimming and goofing around for about a half an hour, are we at Providence Avenue anymore? In the summer, we are moving north. We are now at Boston Avenue. But if we had wetsuits on, and we were polar bear type people, and we did the same thing in the winter, after a half hour, we'd be at Hartford Avenue. And those longshore currents is the way the currents come. They hit the beach, and whatever angle they come in at, they come off in the same angle, and they move sand as they do it. The sand just moves either up the beach or down the beach. And it generally moves positively down the beach because it's stronger in the winter. Notice we have rougher water in the winter here. And so that's why beaches move. But what do they do? Here's the longshore current. Here it's coming, let's say, north to south. Now, as it's moving north to south, what it does is when it hits the inlet, it starts going in because it doesn't have resistance, does it? And it actually deposits sand, and there's this little curl that builds up. And over the years, you get one curl, two curls, three curls. But at the other side of the inlet, it's hitting the inlet, and it's pushing it backwards and flattening it out. So over the years, inlets in New Jersey move in what direction? South. That's exactly right. They may move slowly, they move quickly, and this is just another picture of it. Looking down on it, you can see the additions of sand here and the cutting away of sand there. But are you getting that picture? Okay. Now, you say, Norm, how do we get new inlets forming? What's the process? Now, this was fascinating to me when I found it because I had no idea this. Here's a picture of an island. I don't want to be in your way, sir. And this is what's called the foredune, the large dune, whatever it is, that's usually in the front of an island. Now, we don't have them as much today because we knocked them down to get rid of the greenheads and mosquitoes in the 1860s and 70s for Atlantic City and the other places. But over the years, the beach in front of the foredune will be worn down by those longshore currents. Does that make sense? It just keeps moving sand. Then what will happen, before a storm, but with little storms, eventually the beach line will get so close to the dune that it will start eroding away at the dunes, pecking at the dunes, and it will make canyons in them, if you will, openings. Then what happens when a storm comes along, say Sandy, for argument's sake, and remember this, now I'm going to turn my back to you intentionally. When Sandy is coming, and we're going to make this line the coast right here. When Sandy is coming up the coast, it's turning counterclockwise. So which way is it pushing the water in? And the waves, and those waves knock down the rest of the dunes. But they don't cut an inlet. They just flatten it down and at best make a little gully. But during a storm, not only is sand pushed, I have a niece and her husband who live at Sweetwater. on an island in the middle of the Molucca River. Their house was built so that they could handle as much as 6 to 7 feet of water above normal tides. They were within 6 inches of that limit during Sandy. So that means covering their island was about 6 feet of water. Plus the extra foot that it doesn't usually come up to the island. They had 7 feet of water. Jim Mason, our member that's also the former Atlantic County traffic engineer, helped me find on the DEP website, and that's exactly what the average was up at Sweetwater, 7.5 feet over average water. That's a lot of water. And now all that water pushes up the river valley. And the storm, here it is, but eventually what does this hurricane do? It moves away and moves north and goes and bothers Long Island and leaves us alone. And what has to happen to all that water? The tide will drop. Gravity will force it faster than anything. And when that water comes out, that's what cuts the brand new inlet, because it has to go somewhere. So are we okay kind of with that picture? Now that we understand that, let's go to our geography. This is what the Molucca River watershed looks like. When I did this at Stockton, now I have to tell you I haven't had a mathematics course since calculus my first year at Temple University. And I made the terrible mistake of trying to calculate with my old geometry how much water would be pushed up there and how much water would come out. And I expressed that at Stockton with a lot of caveats. But one of the physics professors was not happy with my math. And so that slide has been dutifully removed from the presentation because he says I exaggerated it by about half. But I can tell you that even with half, the water was in the billions of gallons coming out of the Molucca River watershed, and so would it have come out of the Great Egg Harbor watershed in the same way. And so I wanted you just to see how big that was. Now, here's a picture that gives you the same thing. The water comes in and it builds this flood tide delta inside those islands, and outside, of course, it builds an ebb tide delta, but we don't see that because that's underwater. And that's what we call shoals outside of an inlet. Now, what are they where do you think they're getting some of the sand to put on our beaches now? That's one of the best sand mines there are, right there, those big deltas outside inlets. And that makes our inlet usable again, which they're doing to Little Egg Harbor Inlet. Now, okay, now let's go to a real live map and talk about this. 2017, NOAA, the waterway map, available online. The red line shows the, how many of you have ever had your mind go blank? Okay. The water, the current, longshore current, thank you. You are wonderful and you're merciful, thank you. And the current is coming this way, and as it comes this way, it moves the sand down, and now it hits the inlet. Look how it's bending this around right here at the tip of Long Beach Island, at the end of the sanctuary there. But over here, when it hits here, look what it's doing to this. This end was all the way out here originally, but now it's flattening it out, and it's made this other set of islands disappear. It's compressed them. And you can still see those islands there and there, though. That is Great Bay, by the way. And this is the inlet. Now, do you see this old here? That's where the inlet was during the American Revolution. And here's where old Brigantine Inlet was. Here's where Brigantine Inlet is now. So, you say, Norm, Pinelands has a lot to do with cutting inlets. That's where the water gets stored, for the water to go out and just cut them. So now we take a tour, and we say, what has our area looked like over the years? Well, this is the way it looked to people in Europe in 1513, in a Dutch map, and there's something obviously missing from this map. Do you know what it is? The Western Hemisphere, North and South America. This is only about 23 years after Columbus. And I don't think half the map makers at this point were quite sure what they had yet. And so this is what they were still showing in many of the maps, and earlier than that. Now we come to a map just a few years later, 1687, and aha, the map makers have found North America. And not only that, look what else they found. New Jersey. And already, look what they have found. Little Egg Harbor and Great Egg Harbor inlets. Not much detail, because the maps at this point are designed for what? For ships. They're not making land maps. They're ship maps. And the only reason the ship map is made, Tony, is to get the captain to a harbor where it's going to be safe. And so that's what you have. Little Egg Harbor, Great Egg Harbor, because they were really the only inlets that they could have a chance of coming in without getting caught on the shoals at this point. So now we go to the next one. Now this guy is not related to me as far as I can say, but he has a good last name. 1666. Now this guy, by the way, did not come to America to make this map. And how do we know that? Because what he did is he reversed Great Egg Harbor and Little Egg Harbor. And he put Little Egg where Great Egg was supposed to be and Great Egg where Little Egg was supposed to be. But I want you to see something that you're not used to. Number one, see the sandbar showing? You're only going to get in that inlet at high tide. Look at Longport Ocean City Inlet. But what do you see in the middle of that inlet? Do you know what Longport Inlet was once about 3 times as wide as it is right now? With a 1.5 mile island out in the middle. That nobody ever named as far as I can tell. It was known by the unimaginative name of Sand Island. And you know why. Now, here we go into the 1700s, and here we have Little Egg Harbor Inlet. Now, by the way, this is not the Little Egg Harbor Inlet of today. This is Holgate. It's 5 miles north on Long Beach Island, and here is a sandbar. This is Brigantine Inlet, and look at the name of what we call Atlantic City Inlet today. Comfort Inlet, but by this time, what is Ocean City Longport Inlet called? Shoal Inlet, or Great Egg Harbor Inlet. Why? Because it was all shoals. And if you go out Longport Inlet today in a boat, you need to be real careful, or you are still going to find those shoals, and it's awful tough to get towed off of them. You say, it sounds like you know from experience. I was raised with a boat, I do. Long before sea tow. Now we're coming up to 1752, and this is the first map that really has river detail. Now here's Great Egg Harbor is kind of here, and you can see that, and you can see well, maybe there's an island there, maybe there's not. But I want you to come up here and look at this. Here's where the Mullica River comes out. So here is where the inlet should be, is today. But look how it's up north here. It's actually Holgate Inlet, or Little Egg Inlet originally, emptied out of Little Egg Harbor Bay. And down here you have Brigantine Inlet, you have Atlantic City Inlet. And there's not much detail. Obviously, there's a bay you can traverse behind the islands. Keep the thought of bay in your mind. Wait till you see what's happened there over the years. How many of you, by the way, have been raised in Atlantic County? Raise your hand. Oh, you're in for a big surprise. Now, this is from the 1905 Geological Survey of New Jersey, done by the state geologists for the state legislature. Here, in 1905, is where the end of Long Beach Island is. Here is the end of Brigantine. Can you see that? Here is where the end of Long Beach Island was in 1767. And all this was an island called Tucker's Island. And this inlet here, this was been around, and this was closed and was not even opened until the end of the 1700s. And then here is Brigantine Inlet. By the way, does anybody know what the alternate name of Brigantine Inlet is?
Wreck Inlet.
Wreck Inlet. What what does that tell you about going in and out of that inlet? As a teenager with my ski boat, I never understood why my father didn't want me anywhere near there. And being a teenage boy, if he didn't want me anywhere near there, guess what? The library staff had the same trouble with me, where is Dale standing in the back. When they made me the librarian, the first thing I did when I was in here early morning one morning was to go look in the filing cabinet that said, do not look into this. I had to know what was in there. The little boy has not left. But you can see how this island moves down, 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 and this shortens up. And that's a fascinating map. By the way, all these are available online. Here we're coming up to almost 1800. Just at about 1800 is when a hurricane changes all this. But still, here's the Mullica River, this is Great Bay, and look how far north the inlet is. It's not there at all, it's at Holgate. Brigantine Inlet is here. And by the way, look how little Brigantine is right now. This is kind of a no man's island, little beach we call it today, part of Brigantine. Here's Atlantic City, here's Great Egg Harbor, and look what's out in the middle. And by the way, right here where I have this arrow, Longport stopped in the late 1700s where the Longport Bridge is today. It went no further. And the gardens in Ocean City didn't get filled in until around 1900. I just did a research project there for an attorney based on old maps, involved in a real estate lawsuit. And I was stunned at how much of Ocean City wasn't there until 1900. And so this, as best I can tell, is about 3.5 to 4 miles wide, this inlet at this time. And here's this sand island out here in the center. So now you're starting to see how storms and things move inlets. Here we go 1812, and we're just about done this tour. And here we have Little Egg Harbor Inlet, but now we're after 1800, right? Guess what? The hurricane came along about 1800. Here's Old Inlet, and here's now New Inlet. You say, Norm, why did they name it Old Inlet and New Inlet? Because the Old Inlet was older, and the New Inlet was newer. They didn't get creative. They just knew it. Here's the island sitting in the middle. That's Tucker's Island. By the way, that had a hotel on it. A lighthouse? How many of you saw on the Facebook page that lighthouse falling into the bay? That was right on that island there. Look at the size of Brigantine Inlet now. It's over a mile wide. You come down to Atlantic City. You say, wow, that's pretty big too. And then you come down to Great Egg Harbor, Longport, and look at the size of this. Here's Longport Bridge right here. All this is inlet, and here's this giant sand island out there. You say, Norm, what did they use those islands for? I mean, why did people buy them? They would swim their cattle out in the spring, let them graze on the island. Absecon Island, we have pictures downstairs in the vault with Absecon Island having a mountain range of sand dunes from 30 to 50 feet high. Somebody said that's impossible, it's a lie. I said, well, where did the pictures come from? They didn't have Photoshop, and they're from the 1860s, by the way. Didn't have Photoshop then. And the person said, well, I guess they did. But that was all up and down, and they were vegetated. There were actually forests on Atlantic City, Ventnor, Margate, Longport. By the way, here's a question for you. Put this in the back of your head. How did they determine the borders between Atlantic City and Ventnor and Margate and Longport? And if your answer is anything like mine was a year ago, is I have no idea. But I'm going to give you an idea. And now we come back to the Gordon map, and we look what the hurricane in 1800, the storm did. It cut New Inlet, but those islands were there long before. Takes 100 years. So what do we know? That this inlet was once open in the past. Here's the old inlet that the British came in the American Revolution. Now, Joe, I want you to picture yourself in a sailboat.
Not a good idea.
Okay, not a good idea. Well, there's a shoal out here, and there's this narrow inlet, and the current's running this way at this this time it's still in October, and now you have to figure a way to get in there. The British had to wait 3 days on the outside of the inlet before they came in. When they went to go out, their brand new flagship ran aground. They couldn't get it off, and they had to blow it up and burn it so the Americans wouldn't get a flagship.
Blow it up where?
Blew it up right in that inlet somewhere there. And evidently it was a pretty good explosion because people all the way over into Leeds Point could see it. Here is New Inlet. You can see it's pretty wide. Here's Old Brigantine Inlet as we saw. And do you now get the picture of what happened at Little Egg Harbor? And by the way, what happened eventually is this. Did what? What do you think happened with this? It closed up. Filled in. The currents just came down, filled it in more and more and more. Finally it filled in, and before Ocean City was built, I have a map downstairs that shows that this entire area here has been laid out for a subdivision. Streets, houses, and guess what they were planning to call it? Ocean City. But along came Mother Nature. Remember there was an ad years ago that says you better not mess with Mother Nature or something like that? Well, I think that's what was applied here. And by the way, you can still see on this map, you can still see Tucker's Beach there. See the name? And where it says Tucker's, that's where the hotel was. And that was one of the first, that was before Atlantic City. That was in the late 1700s. Probably the first shore resort there was. So Resorts International has nothing on Tucker's Hotel, except Tucker's Hotel is way underwater today. Here are those other islands that were over there that should be on this map. And with that, let's look at what really happened. Somewhere back in the 12 to 1400s, a Category 3 hurricane hit directly in here. Now, let me just make a disclaimer here. Yeah, I am a retired seminary professor, and in the seminary we have, I trained pastors, and we haven't graduated to BCE and CE, and so you will still see AD or BC. I just haven't quite remembered to get that, so I don't mean to offend you, but if the brain at 71 is not working as good as it used to. Now, this direct hit, from what we can see, is what opens Old Brigantine Inlet, and it lasts for hundreds of years. They've done borings out there, and they know about when it was. Brigantine Inlet slowly moves south. The old inlet closes, but the deltas remain. Because remember, once the inlet closes, Cheryl, there's nothing to mess with those islands in the back. So they're going to be a fixed feature. If you go up there today and you go back there in a boat, they are right there, just staring you right in the face. Now, in 1778, a nor'easter came along and started making Old Inlet much smaller. And that's what gave the British a fit, by the way. And then in 1800, it closed it more and opened New Inlet to form Tucker Island. But in 1821, it made New Inlet bigger, and Old Inlet, when New Inlet becomes bigger, there's less water to go out Old Inlet, so Old Inlet becomes smaller. You got the idea? Now, Old Inlet is closed and ends by about 1870. However, in the 1920s, another storm comes along, and guess what it does? It opens it up again, and it was called Beach Haven Inlet. You're starting to get the picture of opening, closing, opening, closing. Now we get to the interesting stuff. Here, by the way, is a map, 1929, showing Beach Haven Inlet. Here's Little Egg Inlet today, just where it's supposed to be. But this storm came along and opened the old inlet up again, and this is still called Tucker's Beach. And right after this, or right about that time, is with the house on the end of the island went because the storm took away the sand under the house. And if the sand under the house disappears and your house is sitting on the sand, you have a problem. Okay, now let's move to Brigantine. Old Inlet, we've had enough of that. 1752. The northern part of Brigantine is just a little island. Brigantine Inlet is right up where Little Egg Harbor Inlet is today, and the rest of Brigantine Island is long. It's as long, almost, as all of Brigantine and Little Beach today. That's there. We're in 1750, let's say. Now, we go to 1795, and we say, wait a minute, Norm, hold it just a second. Look at the size of northern Brigantine now. It's monstrous, and southern Brigantine is just this teeny little island. Right, because this inlet in here, the storms and the longshore current just keep moving it north and south, and north and south. You know, like a slinky toy went down the steps. Boom, 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 boom. We're an accordion. It just keeps on going up and down. We come into 1812. Well, wait a minute. You say, Norm, this island shrunk again, and now the bottom is big again. Excuse me. I just did something wrong. They're both the same size. Yes, and there's a big inlet at Brigantine Inlet now. Now it's evenly split. We went from a little top and a big bottom to a big top and a little bottom, and now to evenly split. And these are only a few decades apart. Now here we come back to our Gordon map, and now look at it. The entire island is one piece, and Brigantine Inlet is non-existent. But here's a big surprise. Atlantic City Inlet is now two inlets. Absecon Inlet, with an island in the middle called Peters Beach, and a second inlet called Quarters Inlet that's about a half a mile up into Brigantine today. You say, how do you stop that? Build jetties. That's how they stop it, and that's what they did. But look at that. And by the way, do you see the islands, how they're formed back here? But it's hard to see, but this little, right in there is where that extra inlet is. Now I want to show you something else. I want you to look at Absecon Island. Let me get this light to go on again. Here it is here. Here's the inlet, and there's Longport. Tell me what you see in that island about the middle. A what?
Another inlet.
Another inlet. You say, wait a minute, Norm.
Dry inlet.
That's called Dry Inlet. Let me tell you how I first heard about it. My grandmother was about 93. She lived in Atlantic City, and we had this giant house that we were raised in with our family sporting goods store attached to it. And my mother was probably 70 at the time. And she called my wife and I, and she said, listen, I can't handle Mom alone. She's like getting up on ladders, cleaning drapes at the top of 10-foot ceilings, and you know how we're all going to get that way one day if we're not careful. So we moved over there. I moved my office over there, my study over there, and I would do everything from there. Eventually, dementia set in. Now my grandmother raised me, by the way. I was raised in the house with her. But at one point, she knew me. Joe, you'll get a kick out of this, but she didn't know my name anymore. I was Mr. Minister. That's all she could get out. She knew that much, and she would walk out there, and she would try to con me into letting her do things like get on ladders and do that. And when I'd tell her, Grandma, you can't do that, she'd say, some minister you are. Dry Inlet. It is where Jackson Avenue is today. You say, Norm, other than lines on maps, is there proof? Yes. My brother is the building inspector for Ventnor and for Longport. And on the south side of Jackson Avenue, he has, in some of those houses where they've been rebuilt and they've done things in the backyard, when they've excavated, he has found the remains of old bulkheads in there. Now, how did I hear about it? Dear Grandma was talking to Mr. Minister one day, and she said, I wish I could go on a train ride to Longport again. I said, really, Grandma? And she would sit there when I was doing lesson plans and everything. And I said, well, what did you do there? And she said, oh, I was 8 years old. My mom had just remarried. My stepfather was the county detective. and somebody robbed somebody in Longport, so he had to take the train down to investigate, and he decided to take me with him so we could pick beach plums. I had never heard beach plums before in my life. Somebody has recently told me you can buy beach plum jam now in Cape May. But here's what she said to me. She said, Norm, we crossed over 2 bridges before we got there. Well, my first response was what? Come on now, Grandma. There's no bridges between Atlantic City and Longport. Well, if she were still alive, I would owe her an apology for doubting her, because there were 2 bridges. The second one was at Fredericksburg Avenue and separates Ventnor and Margate, and my brother has also, in those yards on the Ventnor side, found the remnants of old bulkheads there. And how deep they were, this inlet at one time was navigable. Fredericksburg Avenue, I have not found any record as to what it was called. It's just there. There was a third inlet. People told me about it, and it shows up if you look at an old elevation map. And that is where Margate and Longport meet. And so that's how, in all probability, the borders of the cities were established. Ruth Taylor came along and she wanted to buy Longport from Margate, we'll say, from Ben Brenner. And Ben said, okay, Ruth, I'll sell it to you from I'll sell it to you from that inlet to that inlet. She said, sold. They wrote up a bill of sale. And the inlets are noted in some of the old deeds. And so that's what's there. Now, how many of you were raised on Absecon Island? Raise your hand. Oh, not too many. Look at this. The bay comes around, it's supposed to. It cuts over there to go in back of Bader Field. But look at the bay. It doesn't go out mile stretch. It keeps on going and goes all the way to Longport. Now there's a shock to me that our bay in Atlantic City traversed the entire length. Well, just like everything is moving up here, things are moving down in Ventnor, Margate, Longport, and Atlantic City, and I went back to that and didn't want to, excuse me. There we go. Okay, here is a clearer map from 1839 that shows not only dry inlet, but look at the bay going all the way down. You say, Norm, that bay cuts straight through Ventnor Gardens, most of Margate, and part of Longport. Right. You say, well, what happened to it? Progress before there was a DEP. Early versions of bulldozers and dump trucks, whatever they looked like, filled it all in the 1890s, the 1900s. By 1900, it's all gone. Now, here is the map of all maps. 1888 Cook's map. You can't see this in detail. I could not. The projector just won't get it up there in detail. But I want you to see this is Atlantic City. Here's the bay. Here's Bader Field. There's where the airport was built. Here it comes back here, and you can actually see the creek go off to become dry inlet at Jackson Avenue. You see it going down there? But here's the bay continuing all the way down to the where here in Ventnor and Margate, on the border of Ventnor and Margate, there's actually almost a big saltwater lake back there, like a bay in itself. And from there, where this pink is, it goes all the way down and comes out to there. What you can't see on this map, this is probably the most fascinating map. Whoever did this had the height of the sand dunes measured. And if you get a magnifying glass, you can see the topographical lines. And so somebody could take this map and actually draw a profile of what Absecon Island looked like before all the homes were built. And that map is in the State Archives. And so now we go to our last inlet, Great Egg Harbor Inlet with its island in the middle, and I'll rush here a little bit. We have a big watershed, so we know it's going to cut inlets in and out. We go to here, 1841, Here is Longport. Here is where the Longport Bridge would be today. Here is New Inlet here. Here's what's left of it. Here's Ocean City. Here's Old Inlet. And here's this strange looking sand island out there. Look at the shape of that island. Now, why is it shaped like that? Because the currents are swirling around it and moving the sand as they go. Here is the other inlet to show it's back here early on. Yeah, this is the state geologist report. And little by little, the longshore current continues to move more sand down here. Ocean City gets pushed in there, some storms added to it, but look right in here, you can barely see it. Here is the outline that in the late 1800s, Sand Island still existed. And this was all done, the maps that were used to make this by the state, they don't pretty much exist today. But that's how big Great Egg Harbor Inlet looked like. I want you to picture a Great Egg Harbor Inlet today. And I want you to triple it. And then stick 1.5 miles long island out there in the middle with an inlet on each side. And that's what it looked like. Back to the map, what did it do? The storms came in, pushed the water in, they pushed it back out after the storm, and a new inlet was cut, and it keeps moving and moving and moving. And so the point is here, where we live, which looks very stable, was at one time very unstable. When you see a border today, somebody made that border because something existed there that they could point to. And if we did not build our jetties the way we do now, it would be moving still. And so, if I can have the lights on, and